Human-computer interaction as we know it, or if you don't know it, as you know it now, it's changing. So it's changed very much in the last 10 years. And there's a new field emerging called human data interaction, or HDI, as we like to call it. And this is a response to the need that basics of HCI just no longer can fulfill what we need at this point in time. So are we there yet? We are not. There is a lot of work to do, and I like to think that what I'm doing might actually help. We're working on it. The third wave of HCI is here, and it's driving the need to understand today's socio-technical systems. But it's really hard to understand these because they're so complex, and we need new methods, and we need to be creative in doing this. And I believe that interdisciplinary, creative, and art and design-led approaches are actually key to this. Being creative matters. So human data interaction is a big part of this, but how do we apprehend data? How do we find frames with which we can understand it? And could possibly imagining data as a creative material in itself help with this? So the answer might be yes. I think we need creative methods to explore how to do it. So basically my work is all about how we can understand complexity with simple creative techniques. So we're not so different from machines. After all, we made them based on our own knowledge, and in some respects with robotics in our own image. So we both have data that's held in a repository, in our case, brains, or in the computer's case, a hard disk, or now cloud servers. We still both have outputs, sound, image, and physical. In computing terms, we're beginning to see a new wave of interactive devices like shape-changing interfaces where your data of the screen is actually physical and you can interact with it with your hands. We both take inputs, and this is where we start to differ though. Whereas we take input from the world, computers can take input from other machines as well, and then have environmental data, all sorts of things, and the amount of data that they can hold at any one time is also greater. And we also have different outputs. At the moment, we can't, well, in some respects, we can slightly interface with machines directly in the case of robotic limbs, for example. But on the whole, we don't have the ability to interact directly with the huge amount of big data that's held inside the computer or output that in a meaningful way. So big data, basically, it's data, it's very complex, and we need to work with the machines to actually understand this. It's a symbiotic relationship. So the problem is that we and the computers both struggle to understand each other's relationship with data. And we can't exactly do it by ourselves either. So what's next? So we have a lot to learn from design, which is a relatively young field in terms of all the other famous ones like biology, chemistry. Design is useful because it borrows things, it borrows ideas, it borrows inspiration, and it's a truly interdisciplinary way of looking at things. It's hybrid, and it's actually very open to new approaches. One of the good things about human-computer interaction as a field within computer science is that it has a very strong design-led area. So I'm super interested in art data interaction and how that works as a space. We've always been working with data in this way. It just took many forms and things we may not associate with data. By revisiting artistic and creative practices, we can inform human data interaction and the wider field of human-computer interaction. And here we get to the painting by numbers. So data is art and data is a material. As soon as we imagine data to be like material, like paper and pens, paint, or even concrete, then it begins to make more sense as a design challenge, something we can touch, something we can work with, something we can make malleable. And data has been right here under our noses for thousands of years. For example, the Ashango bone was a very early calendar of Menses, and this is one of the earliest forms of data recording that we know. There's also the opportunity to look at cave paintings as data. These tell the story of civilizations that lived a very long time ago. And we're familiar with storytelling as a medium. It's how we used to report things to each other, like in the oral tradition. We can embed socio-cultural narratives with future thinking about data. We can use visual narratives to also tell the stories that haven't happened yet, allowing investigation and reflection. So here's some examples of work that I've been doing. You might or may not recognize the format, but comics can be a really valuable way of exploring concepts and futuring. This was done as part of a design fiction with Dr. Paul Coulton et al., and it is based upon the idea of empathy being used in online dating apps, and based also upon the Blade Runner machine, the Voight Kampf machine. If you'd like to read more about that, then feel free to contact me and I'll send you the full comic. We can also use comics or scenarios to investigate user experience design. And in this case, this is me looking at future user experience design and finding out what problems, what pitfalls might occur if we build these things by sketching out the stories that could happen. And these were taken from future work sections of existing works, looking at shape-changing interfaces. People ask questions like, well, how can the medium of the mobile phone possibly support its own weight when you scroll it out? For the pet in the middle, they asked, what happens if someone hacks that pet and it has access to everything in a physical form? And of the coat, I think my own mother said, what happens if you put the coat on the floor to use it as a stool? It'll get dirty. How do you wash something that is wearable and digital? And all these things came about the medium of drawing and investigating and interrogating those drawings. You can also get a lot of data in this form from completely random people. So one of my favorite things is collecting data from any participants I can find, and you'll be surprised how many people can draw when you actually put them to it. And then you can use these drawings and analyze them in a similar way to the ones before by querying them, adding themes, adding notes, finding out what they tell you about the device that the person is imagining. This was part of a longer study where we look at diagramming and storytelling as part of a design method for shape-changing interfaces. So we can also gain insight from the work and interactions of others by transcribing them into new forms. So we are observers and data evolves as it passes along, like the oral tradition, but with sketches. Other work I've looked at is getting an entire conference of computer scientists to draw pictures. And you'd be surprised how engaged they were, from maybe just drawing one post-it note with a picture of a worm in a top hat, right through to 4 pages of complex sketch notes by the end of a conference. People responded, they listened actively, they worked together, they created an exhibition at the end of the conference. And it was all new and exciting because most of these people didn't draw, hadn't picked up a pen in years, and they created this amazing repository of visual data. And it can also be quite subjective, or like reportage, which is a form of illustration we use to tell stories about what's happening in the world without photography. For instance, before photography, people would draw pictures and they would be included inside our newspapers and magazines. This is part of some work looking at bringing digital radio to the West Cork Islands. And I liked to respond to what was happening with sketches and quotes. And these made their way into a research paper where we look at what happens around the scene, around what's happening in the main research project. There's a lot of peripherals that go on, and you can capture a lot when you're not being obtrusive. The sketch artist has the ability to pop into a place, record something, and then pop out and not actually interfere with what's happening. And that's a really valuable skill to have in research. I'm also very interested in mental models. So what we hold in our head can inform the way we interact with systems and help us design new dialogues. For example, what does cybersecurity mean to us? These are 4 responses looking at cybersecurity, risk, trust, and privacy, all in pictorial form. And you can see that most people have this particular person has physicalized what they see in terms of things they can understand. And that's part of the way we interact with data, is trying to make sense of complexity with simplicity. So the reverse of what I'm trying to do. But this helps us build from the bottom up, find gaps where we need to actually inform people better about what's happening in this area. And I think this is also something we could roll out in different areas of computer science. So what happens when we let it all out? Subjective insights are possible via the creative process, and these insights can be just as valuable as those gathered from participant-focused studies. For example, when you start to sketch deeply yourself and to create, you can actually find out a lot of information, and it helps you work through problems in your head. It helps you think and ideate and create. And I think as computer scientists, being creative is one of the things that keeps us going and is making digital better. So I think this is the bit you've been waiting for. What happens when we are not bound by the conventions of data visualization? What if our data was mapped explicitly onto a physical, viscous material, like paint? So that's precisely what we did. We gave 20 participants exact measures of paint in milliliters and asked them to create whatever they wanted with it. They're saying, this paint is your data. How do you want to represent the data? And we had everything from the traditional confines of bar charts, right through to Rothko-esque pieces of artwork, right through to physical paint where it was layered up into marks and blobs. And this is hopefully going to inform the way we think about design templates for visualization authoring, and also how we think about data. And it's not just paint. Data physicalisation is a relatively new part of the field where we look at building our data into things like Lego bricks or sculptural forms, or even moving sculptural forms. So potatoes, that's also, unexpected but fun. I was involved in a study where we tried to democratize this visualization process by allowing people to carve their own potato stamps and use them to print data, which helps also time save, so you don't have to keep drawing the same things over and over again. And it's a really good way of engaging with people who aren't familiar with data visualization, who aren't familiar with the science of it or how it might pertain to computer science. And every bit of this work, it may look a bit mad, but it really helps people. On the more complex side, a lot of the work I've been doing is with shape-changing interfaces and data physicalization. This particular platform was built some time ago by Taha and Al, and it's been used to investigate how we perform around physical data and with it, and how we can do that co-located. For instance, this particular study looks at how we interact when we can touch the data we're working with, rather than just sharing a computer screen or even several computer screens. And it's really interesting to find out how the physical manifests itself in terms of territoriality and working together and collaboration. And it can be more simple as well. White box prototypes are quite bizarre, but they allow us to feel the medium and to play with the textures that we might use to create the next generation of physical computers. And as you can see, my work spans sketching, detailed drawing, building, and even mechanical aspects. For instance, what can origami do to tell us about the future of smartwatches? This particular project looks at how we can use particular folds to enhance the way we look at our screens, because smartwatch space is quite limited. What happens if you want to extend it, use it as a map, and type into it without a miniaturized keyboard? So what's it all about then? So it's not just visual methods, in my opinion. I think creative methods, as I see them, which span practices such as sketching, photography, comics, documentary, physicalization, acting, role-playing, dance, and even making, and playing games, have the potential to really inform the way we do things. We need to be creative. After all, Watson and Crick built their DNA model out of physical components to help them understand it. These methods not only offer opportunities for subjective practice, but also novel approaches to education, working with participants, and modes of analysis and determination. And what's more, if we vary the way we work with data, we make it more inclusive, accessible, and also make it open to interpretation by multiple audiences. So these methods aren't new. I did not invent painting. I didn't invent potato prints, but they are a useful tool in the box for human-computer interaction. And given the rise of human data interaction, having a bigger box is not only a nice thing, it's a necessity. So I'd like to say thank you very much to everyone. I can be contacted, obviously, via the university, and I'm also on Twitter.